This video is sponsored by Skillshare.
Hey, what's up guys? Today's video is all about clicker presses and laser cutters. And if I had to choose just one, which one would it be? I get this question asked to me a lot, and I thought I'd just explain it to you in a video. For everyone who's looking to buy either a laser cutter or a clicker press, hopefully this video will guide you in the right direction. At the end of the video, I'm gonna be revealing which one I would choose if I had to pick just one. And it's gonna be super hard because I use both every day for very different reasons. But let's just figure out what I'd use if I had to pick just one. So let's go. For this video, I'm gonna be using a pros and cons approach. It's helped me in the past when buying products or machines to really know the pros and cons of each machine, because that will help guide you to the correct machine. The machines I'm going to be talking about in this video are the 25-ton clicker press from Atom and the Glowforge Pro from Glowforge. This doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the brands, it's just talking about the machines themselves. I'll be leaving links in the description for both of these machines if you wanna go check them out. And if you're interested in getting a Glowforge, the link is in the description where you can save up to $500. So not bad. Okay, let's talk about the pros of a clicker press. So with the clicker press, it's a really fast setup time. There's no software involved, there's no masking of the leather involved. It's just putting your leather inside the clicker press, grabbing your dies, and just cutting out shapes as fast as you can. This is especially important if you're trying to get things done quickly. Cutting out coasters, or cutting out wallet parts, or cutting out pretty much anything, the setup time is next to zero. Another pro of a clicker press is that you can cut through really thick material. You can cut through 10, 11, 12 ounce with no problem at all. And often with these hydraulic clicker presses, there is a pressure knob or a button that allows you to increase the pressure so that you can cut through larger or thicker material depending on what you're using. A clicker press is not only used just for leather. Pretty much any material that you can fit under there, like canvas, foam, cloth, foam core, paper, you can put under there and click out shapes. It's actually very versatile. Another great thing about a clicker press is that there is no venting needed. There's no exhaust fumes. There's nothing that will create dust or smoke or anything like that where you have to actually vent it out of your shop. So that's really cool. There are also different types of clicker presses. There are hydraulic clicker presses and there are manual clicker presses. And within those families, there's different styles too. A manual or hand clicker press is super valuable. I used that for a long time until I was able to afford a hydraulic clicker press. Within the clicker press families, there are also different price points. So depending on how big your bed is, or if it's a hydraulic or a hand clicker, you can kind of find what works for you. I chose a really big bed with my clicker press because I wanted to be able to cut out satchels and tote bags and bigger items that I couldn't cut out with my manual hand clicker press. Another great thing about these clicker presses is that they are built like tanks. They can operate all day, every day, and not skip a beat. I really, really like that. I don't have to worry about things failing on me. There's not a lot of moving parts in these hydraulic presses, and so you can go all day, just chunk, chunk, chunk. I love just how strong and robust these machines are. There are a ton of other pros for clicker presses, but those were the main ones that I could think of that I thought would help you out. So not every machine is perfect. There's always good things and bad things about machines or designs. So let's get to it. Some of the cons of clicker presses. Clickers can be expensive. The clicker press that I own is used, and I bought it for about $10,000 Canadian. And so they can be very expensive. And that's one thing you gotta look out for. Even manual or hand clicker presses can get very expensive. It really depends on the brand, the size, and the type of clicker press you're buying. So just be careful, they can get very expensive. Another con is that clicker presses require dies. And that's one thing maybe we don't think about when we're buying a clicker press is the price of dies. They can get very expensive, especially if you have a lot of intricate designs, or if you want to put holes inside of your clicker presses to punch out stitching holes, it can get super expensive. And you want to make sure that with your designs that they are perfect when you send them away, because you do not want to make a mistake. You don't want to get it back and realize that you sized a pocket wrong or that you put a hole in the wrong place. It can get expensive to fix or tweak, or they might just have to redo the set. So one example, the satchel that I have, the dies that I made for that were over a few $1,000s. So maybe $2,000 to $3,000 to make that satchel. And you really gotta weigh, am I going to make that money back? Is it worth the investment? Not only for the clicker press, but for those dies. It can get scary and fast. So I understand your pain. I understand your pain and your worries. So just be careful of that. Also, when you send away your dies, you never know how long it's gonna take for them to be made. They could be really fast or they could be slow. There's not really any way of gauging unless the person talking to you from that company is really spot on with their estimate of getting your dies done. So be careful with timing. Clicker presses are huge. The one that I have is literally 2,500 pounds. And to move that thing around, if I didn't have casters, would be a nightmare. I would literally need a forklift. I couldn't do it. So I put on these really, really big casters, which were another added cost. They're very, very heavy, and you only kind of want to leave them in one part of your shop. They're not really mobile. They're not really meant to be moved around. They're meant to stay in one spot. Also, they operate on a higher voltage. My clicker press uses 220 volts. It was a 3-phase. I have a box that was installed that turns it to single phase, and you need to install 220 volt receptacles as well. So there's a lot of planning involved, or maybe a lot of rewiring involved too, which you got to think about. It's also not a very diverse machine. It can only really do 2 things. It can cut or emboss. I mean, that's what a clicker does, but compared to a laser or something like that, it can really only do 2 things. Also, for maintenance, you have to change out the cutting board after a while, because if you don't, the amount of times those dies are used on that board, they make these indentations or cut marks. And after a while, your leather pieces will have frayed edges on the sides. So you're gonna have to get those boards resurfaced or pay for another cutting board, which is also very expensive. I realize that these cons have a lot to do with money, and it's not necessarily the machine is a bad machine. It's got to do with cost a lot, I find. And the last con I can think about is that a clicker press does not operate by itself. You need to operate it. You need to be there pushing both buttons and making sure the work is getting done. You can't just set it and forget it, which is not the most ideal situation if you're trying to do multitasking, if you're trying to do a whole bunch of things at once. You have to set time to cut out all your patterns. And so that's one thing you got to remember as well. There are a few more things that maybe I could have talked about more in depth, but for now, I think that's what I wanted to really get across. So there you have it, the cons of owning a clicker press. All right, guys, I want to take a quick second and talk to you about this video's sponsor, because whether you have a clicker press or a laser cutter, you're going to need to learn how to design things in software. If you've been following me at all, you know that I've been designing all of my stuff within Illustrator. Illustrator can seem challenging, or it can seem a little intimidating, but with Skillshare's online community, there are tons of classes in which you can learn Illustrator from. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creators. Whether you are designing patterns or learning how to design logos or learning how to take photos or creative writing, whatever it might be, Skillshare is the place to be. One class that I highly suggest is called Adobe Illustrator CC Essentials Training, and it's by Daniel Scott. He's an Adobe certified trainer, so he knows exactly what he's talking about. He makes things super easy to understand and super easy to follow along. After watching this class, I'm confident that you will know how to use the skills to create patterns or different things for your company, whether it be marketing tools, logos, or whatever else you need for your business. The great thing about Skillshare is that it is specifically curated for online learning, meaning that there are no ads and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. With all of this information and this well of knowledge, it is less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. To me, that is a no-brainer. The first 1,000 subscribers to click the link in the description below will get a free trial of premium Skillshare. Free, it costs you nothing. So why don't you explore new skills, deepen existing passions, or just get lost in creativity? Skillshare's online community is the place to be. What you find will inspire you, and it might just change your life. Okay guys, let's get back to the video. Okay, so let's talk about the pros of a laser cutter. Right out of the gate, the laser cutter is an incredible prototyping machine. So if you're looking to learn how to design things or try things out or prototype, a laser cutter is a perfect machine for it. Because with the laser cutter, you use software to design your files. I use Adobe Illustrator, some people use other vector-based programs, but I find Illustrator works perfectly for my needs. The great thing about owning a laser cutter is that you can change your own designs. You can tweak them, you can manipulate them, you can switch things around, you can do all of these things on the fly. You can do it right away. Having a die sent to you and realizing that, oh my gosh, I messed up is the worst thing in the world. Thankfully, it hasn't happened to me, but I can only imagine that when you get back that die and it's just wrong, you're like, oh my gosh, I have to spend all this money to send it back or to order a new one and then just pray that I didn't make another mistake. Lasers, software, beautiful. With the laser cutter that I have, there's a camera that allows you to position your files or shapes on your material. And with leather, it's really helpful to be able to move your designs around because there's a lot of scarring or blemishes or bug bites that you just don't want to incorporate into your designs. The great thing about lasers is that it can do 3 things. It can cut, it can etch, and it can score. The difference between etching and scoring is etching goes back and forth like a print head, printing your picture or printing your image on the leather. Scoring goes around the perimeter of your image or your object. The fantastic thing about a laser is that it can do repeatable designs. and very intricate repeatable designs. I use it a lot for my watch bands. So the holes that are cut out, the etching that is on my band, the precision of the laser is just so awesome. I love it. It does it the same every time, and I don't have to worry about, is it gonna, mess up here or there? It's just, you set it and you forget it. It's incredible. So the Glowforge model that I have is called the Glowforge Pro. And with it, you get a pass-through slot. So there's a slot at the front and a slot at the back where you can pass through material from one end to the other. So essentially, you can have an unlimited way of cutting or etching going your lengthwise. You're limited in the width, but you're not limited with your length, which is incredibly useful, especially if you're doing larger scale projects. I think the best thing about a laser cutter is that you can just set it and forget it. You set up all your files on your piece of material, whether it be wood or acrylic or leather, and you just push print and it does its thing. You can walk away and do other things and then come back when it's done, which is so important. It maximizes your time. As with anything, there are always gonna be things that you don't like about it. So let's get to the cons of a laser cutter. Laser cutters can be expensive. Again, it boils down to price. Tubes can be expensive, parts can be expensive, and there's other things that you need as well with a laser cutter that you probably wouldn't need with a clicker press. Masking tape, alcohol wipes, cleaning solutions, all this other stuff that you don't necessarily need with a clicker, but that you need with a laser because it generates smoke. So along with all that smoke or debris or dust, you're going to have to vent. And that's one thing that might not be possible if you want to put a unit inside of your house. You might not be in a room with a window or an easy access to somewhere outside, so you might have to cut through the side of your house. In my case, I cut a ventilation hole outside of my garage door, which was not too bad, but it did require me actually physically cutting a hole, and then I had to get a longer hose, and also I had to make some sort of a vent plate, which I did on my Glowforge, which was not too bad actually. It really helped me out. But there's all those added things that you have to figure out when you get a laser. Also, the lasers are not the quietest things in the world. They're pretty loud. They're that constant high when they're moving around too. So if you need to be in a quieter environment, it's not the best, but I mean, machines are gonna make noise regardless of what they do. So with all this smoke and all this stuff going on inside the machine, you're gonna have to clean it regularly. If the laser lenses are covered with smoke film or some sort of dust or fog, it's not gonna cut very well. I ran into this problem once and I didn't realize that my lenses had been covered with smoke dust or soot. And I thought my machine was failing on me. It wasn't cutting through things anymore, but it just wasn't being cleaned. And so cleaning is one of those things you're gonna have to do on a regular basis. With lasers, there's gonna be more moving parts. There's circuit boards, there's power supplies, there's tubes. There's a lot of things that can fail, and they might, and they eventually will. So that's one thing you gotta think about when you're getting a laser. With a laser, you also need software. That could be a pro and it could be a con. With software, if you're not tech savvy, if you're not computer savvy, if you're not design savvy, it could be a little bit of a hindrance to you. Making designs is not the hardest thing to do in the world, but it's another skill you have to learn. But that's okay, we like challenge. Challenge is good for us, so that should not be a con, okay? Another thing that I really just don't like about lasers is that the sizes of the beds are just too small. And the bigger size bed you get, the more expensive the machine gets. And the costs just keep adding up, especially if you're gonna go big. That's one thing that is, I wish I just had a bigger laser bed. But for the smaller things that I do, it's perfect. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you're cutting leather, the only leather that you should be cutting is vegetable tanned leather. Chrome tanned leather, when it's cut, it releases toxic gas. And that's not something you wanna be breathing in. You don't wanna be venting that into your neighbor's yard. You don't wanna be venting that to where people are gonna be walking by and breathing it in. So you gotta be very careful of that. Also, other plastics like PVC or vinyl, once it's cut, it releases, again, toxic gas that is terrible for you. So you can't cut certain things, just be aware of that. Also, when you're cutting leather, it's going to leave a char behind. But depending on what leather you use, I use a lot of Wicket and Craig, the charring is very minimal and I hardly notice any of it rubbing off. Especially when I'm stitching. People complain that when they stitch through their leather goods, when they've made stitching holes with their laser, they get that soot rubbing off onto the thread. And I just don't find that with Wicket and Craig leathers. If you're gonna be cutting chrome tan leathers, you're gonna get a lot of that soot, but you shouldn't be cutting chrome tan leathers anyway. And now it comes down to the nitty gritty, If I had to choose just one machine, this is tough. With a clicker press, you can do a lot of volume really fast. But you're limited to your designs until you can get more designs made, which costs a lot more money, and the list goes on and on. Laser cutters are awesome because you can prototype and design and change things on the fly and just be more creative. But they're slower to set up. But again, they're just so useful in terms of design. It's really, really hard for me to just say what I would choose, but I would have to go with the laser cutter because I love design, I love creating new things, I love being creative in the way that I approach leathercraft. And so I find that the laser cutter would allow me to be more creative. But again, this is just if I had to pick one, and that's so hard to say. I don't know. I'm gonna have to stick with laser cutter. What would you pick? What would you use? After seeing the pros and cons of each machine, what would you pick? It's not something that I would quite easily, it's really hard for me to say laser cutter because they're both very useful. And I mean, I do have both, but what would you choose? What would you pick? Let me know in the comments below, what would you pick? And if you've got any other questions about either a laser cutter or a clicker press, feel free to drop it in the comments and I will try and answer them as best as I can. Guys, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you in the next one. All right, God bless. Peace.